So thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for you all taking the time to drive up from wherever you guys are coming from and come in person and as well as Sheriff Glover for being online and just taking the time to be here. We're just really excited to get this entire grant started and really get your perspective on some of the work that we've been doing. But I think a good way to kind of start this out real quickly is just to kind of give quick introductions, just so everybody knows who everybody is. And I can start off and we can go around the room and then go into online. So I'm Jorge Vasquez. I'm with the Division of Outdoor Recreation, and I'm your Recreation Grant Analyst.
I'm India with the Division of Outdoor Recreation, Deputy Director of Operations.
Andy Smith with Grand County EMS and Moab. I'm representing rural EMS directors.
Shane Whitwer with Whitwer Hospitality, and I'm representing the Utah Tourism Industry Association.
Jared Henry, wear a couple of hats. I'm the Tooele County Chamber of Commerce. I'm also elected official county council.
I'm Nicole Hanna, counsel for DOR board.
Jason Curry, Director of the Division of Outdoor Recreation.
And I'm Patrick Morse, I'm a Recreation Program Director of the division.
And Sheriff Glover.
Yeah, I'm Tracy Glover. I'm the Kane County Sheriff and currently the president of the Utah Sheriff's Association.
Sheriff Curtis. You're muted there, Sheriff Curtis.
I hit the button too quick. Sheriff Nathan Curtis, Sevier County Sheriff and President of the Utah Association of Counties. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. We'll just kind of move along the agenda that I have printed out there for you. For those of you that are online, let me know if you don't have it, but it should be sent through an email. So just making sure you guys have that packet. And we already did the notaries. We did electric notaries online, so we don't have to necessarily worry about that. So everybody's completed their oath of office. So thank you for getting that done on time. Really appreciate you all. And I think from here, I think I'm going to move a few things, and I think I want to start with Nicole and doing the OPMA training here. I can share my screen for that.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Has anybody here not been trained in Open Meetings Act, Basic Grammar, and Basic Conflict? You haven't been, you have?
I have.
Excellent.
I did it yesterday.
You did it yesterday. Okay, hey, John, how are you? We're good online? Okay, so we're gonna go through this really, really quickly because you guys, I'm sure, have heard this a million times before. What we're going to cover is we're going to cover the Ethics Act, we're going to cover open meetings, and we're going to cover grandma, and we're going to do it in about 15 minutes, okay? So this is going to, so I used to make this training really interesting, and then everybody was like, "Can you please just get to the point and just be done?" So we're not doing cartoons or anything, we're just going through this. So basics with conflict of interest that you guys already understand, but just as a reminder, you have actual conflicts that require you guys to abstain from a vote on something, and you have perceived conflicts that don't necessarily require you to do that. The difference between whether you have an actual or a perceived is statutory and has to do with your relationship with the entity that this board is potentially interacting with. If anybody has or feel like they do have some conflicts that they would like to state at the beginning of the board meeting, because they wear lots of different hats, just like almost everybody in Utah does, we have a form that we can send you. Those get filed with the department and with the Attorney General's office. And it is basically just a way to make sure that everything is above board, okay? So if you have an actual conflict, you guys know you can't vote on it. If you have a perceived conflict, which is not really a statutory thing, it's more like, how does this look? Kind of, so I like to think of it as, how would this look in the Salt Lake Tribune if somebody said this person voted on something and they clearly have some kind of interest, or a close family member has some kind of interest, okay? If you guys ever get into that situation, I'm happy to have a little conversation with you for, 30 seconds to figure it out, and happy to provide the forms. And you guys know you can't disclose anything that we learn in these, well, I mean, it's a public meeting, but if we ever go into a closed session of the meeting, that's stuff that we need to keep private. And you guys know that there are consequences for using any of the information that you obtain in any of these meetings or privately, for example, with the grants for your own personal benefit, okay? Same thing with gifts. I know you guys have been through the gifts before. The general thing there, it's not actually clear in Utah law. The general idea is probably don't take anything over $50. Try to keep to a per diem. If you do receive something, there are ways in which we can share that with the office. We can also file disclosures again with the Attorney General's office. So I'm happy to help you guys through if you run into any of that stuff. Okay. You guys know you can't require donations or get any kind of quid pro quo for moving any kind of grants forward or anything. Again, if you're concerned about that or if that becomes a situation, you guys have a really good team at DOR, and so they will help you guys with kind of possibly identifying that. But again, it's just something that that you need to do. You guys know you don't get paid for this, but you get your per diems and stuff according to statute. And, you know, obviously, like, we're not going to bribe people and do all of that horrible stuff, right? We're just going to keep it all above board. I never had a board that I've been the attorney for get into trouble with Open Meetings Act or grandma or ethics. So I just love to keep it that way. So let's not be the first one, okay? That was your super, super quick thing on conflicts, because I know you guys have had it before. Is there something specific that you guys want me to touch on, or should we move on to the Open Meetings Act?
I would just assume, just a quick question, that
Yeah.
we would abstain from voting on any grant that directly affects our organizations.
Yeah, so that's the statutory part of it, and it has to do with what percentage of an organization or your relationship with an individual, and that's set out in statute. So it's usually like immediate family members and greater than a 10% interest. But if you feel like you're on the line or confused, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you about it. All right, so we're going to run through Open Meetings Act. Again, this is something that you guys are a little bit removed from because you have DOR, who is following all of the statutory requirements in terms of posting and everything. You guys know you're subject to the act, and you have to have a quorum present, and there are only certain things that you're allowed to do, and those are all set out in statute. 3 people here constitutes a quorum, just to let you know. So it's a nice small committee. Smaller committees and boards are kind of nice, you know, tends to get a little more interaction with each other. All right, so everything to do with notice, where you have to have the 24-hour notice, and you have to post things within 3 days, and then afterward the meeting you have to post things within 30 days. You guys know that anything that's introduced in the meeting then becomes a public record and part of the meeting. So I would say when you guys are going through the grants, where this particularly applies to you, is you don't necessarily want to have everyone's full grants. Usually Patrick and Jorge will have a spreadsheet that just has the necessary information, but I just would be a little bit conscientious and cautious about releasing private information to people unless you really need to. And there are a couple ways in which we can play with the spreadsheets and stuff in order to keep people's privacy intact in accordance with the new Data Privacy Act, that it kind of imposed a higher requirement on the state boards and commissions to keep people's information private where appropriate. Also, you guys deal with a lot of, are we dealing with any land purchases here? Okay. All right. Let's see. And you guys know everything. The whole point of this is to be transparent and above board with taxpayer money. So there are times in which we can go into a closed meeting where we still take a record, but that's applied to people later on in a process. If there's ever a question about what was done during the closed meeting, there's a separate set of rules for that. So if you guys ever decide to do that, I can walk you through the rules at that time. It doesn't seem worthwhile going through it right now because it may not ever happen. We're all good with all of the recordings. Is just a polite reminder. The one thing that I would say is please be really careful about texting other board members during the board or commission hearing. Anything, if you guys are communicating with each other during a board meeting, then we have to add that as a public document. So if you could just refrain from doing that until after the meeting, I would really appreciate it. It doesn't apply, obviously, like someone was like, hey, what if my dog's sick? I'm like, no, like wives, husbands, that's a different thing. It's just, this is specific to board members about board business, okay? And then you guys also know that you're not really supposed to like have little conversations with each other. It's called daisy chaining. So instead of meeting as a board, you just have individual conversations with different people in order to get to the same result. That's something that we'd also like to avoid. Let's see. And you guys know that you can get in trouble if you don't do what you're supposed to do, but we are going to keep everybody out of trouble. All right, there's your Open Meetings Act training. Super sweet. Wait, we got one more. Okay, how'd I do? Wait, what was my time?
That's like less than.
Nice. All right. So real quick with the Government Records and Access Management Act, which is GRAMA, which I know is everyone's favorite act because we all love getting GRAMA requests so much. Again, the point here is to be transparent and just please be reminded that anything, it's not the device that you use that makes it subject to GRAMA. It's the context and the content of what you're talking about. So if you can try not to use your personal cell phone for board business, that would be great. If you do have to, just know that that would be potentially subject to a GRAMA response. And we also now have an affidavit where you can say, no, I didn't do anything on my phone, and you kind of just take your word for it. But the most important thing that I would like to say is, like, if you're having communications, I get it, especially during these grant committees. I think people get to a point where sometimes they forget that all of this is being recorded. So just a pleasant reminder that this is all being recorded. And the last thing in the world that we want to do is have negative press coverage in like the Tribune, right? So when you're sending texts or when you're talking about things and making decisions, just please do it conscientiously, and so that we don't have to deal with a whole bunch of negative fallout, because this board is really cool. What the DOR does is really amazing, and I would hate to have that tarnished in any way by something silly, like somebody saying something, disparaging about an entity that they're frustrated dealing with, and we all have entities that we are very frustrated dealing with because we've tried to deal with them for, decades, and they're still difficult to deal with. So, all right. So that's me, unless you guys have anything else. All right.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item there, which I had it for just kind of the overview of the Outdoor Recreation Mitigation Board and its overall purpose. I mean, I think obviously just kind of in communications and then you talking to other folks that you have online, I think you all know, this year for various different reasons and just for your perspectives on, especially just for instance, providing input on our grant application, our administrative rules, as we look to administer the Outdoor Recreation Mitigation Grant. And that's kind of more pertaining to, again, those visitor-related safety, emergency costs, as well as safety costs, and which we'll be asking you some additional questions on as we kind of go through today's meeting. Just kind of keeping it quick here, because I really just want to get more into the conversation, I guess, about our application. I think that's kind of the more bigger important part here. But another thing, I don't know, Patrick, is there anything else that I should be putting down? I'm seeing anything there.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're going to need your help as we develop this program. I mean, we have a lot of questions. We have a draft application. That's going to be one. I think as we get into it, you're going to help. We have there's a prioritization model you know, that's kind of established in the code, and, you know, we'd love your thoughts on that. You'll help us pursue that. You can also see, like, we attached the bill as part of this. I'm sure you've looked at it in your packet, and then online, if you check your email, that packet will have our kind of our draft application, and the bill. But in 799104, you know, it really talks about the board and the duties, term limits, how it's made up. But I would just recommend, reviewing that if you have any questions. But it feels pretty straightforward, right? You're here to help us develop this program and then execute this program. That's about it.
Pretty quick, pretty brief. Like I said, we want to get into the more important part, which I think is the application. But the next thing that we have on this list is going to be more of the election of board leadership. In the bill, it does ask for a chair. And so I think it would be appropriate to kind of open that up and see who's interested in potentially chairing for the board. And
Yeah, with all the chair duties that come along with it, on the meeting, that kind of stuff.
yes,
Is it 1 year is it a death sentence is my question?
it's going to be 1 year.
Okay.
1 year. It's a rolling year, so you can rotate it within the year.
Okay. And there is no vice chair. It's established with just one single chair.
And
So opening meetings,
Yeah, I think chair would
do an
work.
agenda beforehand.
Yeah, work with our
Yes.
staff,
Yeah.
do a little of the facilitating for
And
us.
if for the next meeting that we have, we can talk a little bit more about potentially bylaws and just kind of the structure that you want to run it. That could be something that we can discuss, but right now, I think just kind of having just overall chair leadership is important, and then we can get into deeper conversations about, you know, how you would like to run it. But yeah, I think it's open floor.
Open for nominations, is that what you're saying now?
Self-nominations included.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it if it's only a year. If it's 2, it might be a stress. But I'm happy to do it if it's just a year. But anybody else too, I think anybody can do that.
Got my vote.
Sounds like a second. Yeah. You know, we have Sheriff Glover online. Any other self-nominations? We want to get a competition going?
Please do.
Yeah.
I go make some popcorn real quick.
I'm okay with that, if you're gonna make that motion,
I'm ready to do it.
or he made the motion, I guess, if you're seconding that.
Yeah, I'm happy with Andy doing it as well, so I'll be on board.
Sounds good.
Maybe make sure anybody,
Is there,
unanimity establish. That's what everybody really wants. Then we'll go ahead.
And I'll make a motion, we close nominations and appoint Andy by acclamation.
Second.
any objections? No, I think that is unanimous. Okay.
And now we'll just turn it over to the chair to run the rest of the meeting.
No.
So what, we go home early?
Yeah.
Awesome. Congratulations, Andy. You are chair of the outdoor recreation.
Super excited. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's exciting to have chair leadership. So, the next item that we have here is going to be, again, just the overview of our draft application. I do have there as administrative rules, but I think we want to focus again more on the application, as I think it's going to inform more on our administrative rules. And we kind of decided that I don't think it's necessarily ready for dive and as of yet. It's still fairly big into that draft. And so again, we want to look more into the application. And I can go through that here real quickly. Just let me get that pulled up. I will share that here, and I'll go through just kind of our thought process, our intentions, especially just kind of how it's been outlined on the bill here. Let me see if I can find it.
And if I may, with our board's permission, we have a few, I think, very experienced people online, with like Selena, with Brandy, Sheriff Curtis, I would love to be able to invite their comments as we are kind of working through this. I think Brandy, Sheriff Curtis have been really helpful meeting with us a few times since we're developing this. Just want to, put that out there. I would love to be able to invite their commentary as we're discussing this. But
And then I did in the room provide sticky notes and pens. So for those of you that are online, I would ask that you write out any thoughts, concerns, just anything that you have on a piece of paper. I'd really appreciate it if you could send it over after the meeting is over. Same thing, the idea is to kind of keep the applications that you guys have. I can send you another copy if you're needing another copy, but I'd really just like to find a way to just kind of maintain your thoughts and have it in on a sticky note, just so that way we can go through it and continue to develop it. Like Patrick said at the beginning, is in very draft form, but we thought it was ready enough to at least present to the board. And so, so yeah, let's just get on through it here. So this first part is just very kind of standard basic information that we kind of include and in every grant application that we have in terms of like the project title, county, project latitude, longitude, like I said, just the organization tax ID, very basic information. I don't think this is what we're necessarily looking for. This next part in terms of like the applicant information and eligibility data. Our thought behind this, kind of in discussions with a few folks, is trying to make it easier on just the rural counties in terms of submitting and kind of having it as like a pre-filled kind of section where it's information that we have already, and maybe sending it off to the county that's applying, and so that way it makes it easier for them to apply in terms of like the county population, county classification, whether they've have imposed maximum amount in terms of TRT rate, did they generate less than 10 million in revenue for TRT. Those are things that are outlined in the bill, so that's why we printed out the bill as well for you, just so that way you can see it. It's very clear eligibility criteria that's within the bill, and so that's why we're including an application, but it's also information that we felt like we could already have. So that's why we've been working really closely with, for instance, Julia at the Department of Public Safety. She's the one that runs the, I'm trying to remember her application, but she has that survey of all the search and rescues that were kind of done. And application. Yeah, we're trying to make things easier in terms of if she has data, she can send it over to us and we can populate that into our application. Just trying to make things easier for applicants. We have Seth, who's online, who's with the state auditor. Same thing, we felt that he would have some information already, and that's kind of the same thing we're trying to collect. Same idea, any information that he has, we can send over, we can pre-populate the application, and that way make things easier for applicants when they're applying. And that's, again, for the reason that we have that question there, if they're have filed with the state auditors. In the bill, it kind of talks about how that's going to be more important later on. I think it's like 2028 is when they're going to have to have filings with the state auditors. I think as of right now, they're going to be okay to apply if they haven't, but they have to get current with filings with state auditors by 2028. And that would make them eligible. So that's why we have a question here. Same thing as I mentioned, our public safety and the search and rescue application with Julia. That's just kind of helping to inform us of the if she might have any information on any of the things that they are applying for. Again, this is still pre-populated. This is information that Julia mentioned that she could potentially provide us in a sample report with the estimated amount of recreation and tourism that's taking place within the counties over the last 5 years, seasonality and peaks, and just overall increase of outdoor recreation, addressing, the county's current ability and capacity for SAR and EMS, and so forth, solid waste disposal operations, law enforcement, road repair. And then these are more those kind of questions that are kind of informing us and just giving us a better idea of some of the things that are going on in the counties. For instance, just kind of if they've addressing why TRT might be inadequate for the county's needs. I think that could be potentially important. Any other additional funding sources that are kind of insufficient for them for SAR and EMS. And then let's see, I keep going over the meeting here instead of scrolling.
Jorge, can I ask a couple of questions? Sorry, before
Yes.
you move on too much. On the estimated amount of outdoor recreation, tourism, and conventions taking place within your county over the last 5 years, is this in terms of visitor numbers, or is this in terms of volume of dollars brought into the, like, what is the actual question there?
So that's a really good question, and it's just kind of just anything I think that could inform us on what's going on in the county. So I think
The size of
yes.
the
So I
load of
think
tourism,
I think dollar amount could be appropriate as well as
visitor numbers.
yes.
You say visitor numbers, you're talking about zip codes of people that come in or just sheer numbers?
You can look, what we've tried to do here, is just kind of pull a lot of the stuff that Bill's asking for. So that specifically, if you go to 799-202, determining the eligible counties, you know, and we'll kind of get into what the prioritization model is communicated from the bill. And so this is going to be one, but it does say, you know, when we're reviewing these, specifically taking into account the rolling 5-year average of past visitor-related emergency costs of each eligible county. And so that's kind of what we're trying to look at there with visitation.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion would be, and I think actually Sheriff Curtis or Andy might actually have a much better thought process. I think defining what that means will make it very easy for counties to fill it in rather than leaving it up to every county. That way you actually get a true comparison. I just think defining it out makes it really easy, because if you come to MUB and say, well, how many visitors did you have? We judge that by the number of people that go into Arches, but we have thousands of campgrounds outside that never go to Arches, right? And so, you know, that there might be different metrics for every county. So I think being clear about what you're asking makes it really easy to fill out the application.
And there's a piece here about visitor related emergency costs. So we're figuring out a formula for what is
Yeah,
that,
sure.
and how to
Sure.
equalize it across the board for all counties.
Yeah. Okay.
Per visitor, how much emergency related costs were incurred?
Yeah.
That'd be, you know, very easy to then prioritize just based on a metric like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think, you know, kind of looking at this whole first section for the first, you know, as Jorge mentioned, we do want to pre-populate this as we can, you know, and I think this is a number when we talked to Julia from public safety, like she has a few of these potential data points where she can run certain reports. And so there might be the opportunity where like they have kind of their metric that they're running, and like we may not even ask counties to give us these numbers, because our hope is to, as much as we can, to pre-bill some of these things. So,
I mean, the number of visitors is going to be vague. I mean, it could be based on occupancy of hotels. It could be based on national park numbers. I do think that's got to be more refined. But going back, it looks like there are 4 sections in the application, each worth 5 points.
you can disregard that right
Okay,
now.
I was gonna
there's-
say,
yeah.
Scratch.
I mean, that's a good reminder for when we're creating the draft, just because I tried to eliminate some of those things. It's like, well, this is gonna be a question, you know, and we should just remove it because it doesn't, you know, really affect right now, but yeah.
Sheriff Curtis has a question.
Go ahead, Sheriff Curtis.
Thank you. I was just gonna make a comment that I think most of our tourism and events of each county, they've got a pretty standardized model of recognizing the number of visitors to each county. So, and I think the state's gonna help set that up as well. So they've got a pretty good model of how to determine the number of visitors. And I think it's a combination of all the above, you know, from your events, from your tickers or whatever they use, and hotels and restaurants, all those things. So there's a pretty good number in place. I think involving our tourism directors, they'll have those numbers that we can rely on.
Awesome. Thanks, Sheriff.
Can I just add something? This is referring to page 4 on the, with the bill 79-9-202, determining the needs of eligible counties. I think that's the prime thing, is to try to figure out which counties need it the most, and really get it down to having apples against apples rather than against oranges. And I'm talking about counties that really might struggle to raise the necessary, say, taxes because they have so much public land, versus a bedroom community that might be small, but has the ability, because there's so much private land, to raise taxes with property taxes or other things, but they're, you know, as opposed to a county that's constrained, like say Wayne County or some of these others. And
Yeah, that may not have a lot of hotels, but a ton of visitors go through.
Yeah.
Right? I think maybe that's what the address why TRT is inadequate, right? If you've got so much public land, you don't have the number of hotels to help bring in the TRT dollars, or the number of you know, I think that question might help us answer that. And I don't know how that gets prioritized, but I'm sure we'll go through
Well,
that.
it can be if this board, but by the way, I'm Tara McKee. I'm the deputy director with grants and engagement. But anyway, this, this is just something that, over the years as I've dealt with, worrying about search and rescue and so forth, it does seem like it's a bigger burden on those counties. And you as a board can make those kind of suggestions as you're going through and looking at this application.
And then also, I gotta add this, beginning with the end in mind, the intent. This process, this body, this is set up as a temporary incentive in order to get counties to really dial in that reporting so that at some point, this funding becomes more or less automatic based on a formula algorithm or some process that doesn't involve a lengthy process like this. Because once we get the data there, we should be able to project that and be pretty accurate where the money goes and maybe need to adjust on a longer term basis.
Yeah. And to kind of quickly add on to that, I mean, I think that's why any data that we can kind of collect is so important, right? So that way we can share that and we can get truly just the information that is needed to provide to make that decision as a grant and this entire process just kind of sunsets. So
You guys are hand up.
Great chairship.
Hello, good morning. Yeah, to the point of hotels, I just wanted to mention the real reason behind this was to have a statewide rate that would be shifted because of exactly what was just said. Some of the greatest tourism impacts are in areas where there are not hotels.
Thanks, Brandy.
And maybe just to give just a little additional explanation on this, Brian, Andy, we hope we can pre-populate this. I think a common concern is we're going to have a sheriff, all these people trying to enter the same information multiple places. Hopefully, we've been working with staff and Julia, try to pre-populate this, but you'll notice address why TRT is inadequate. We have a few of those qualitative questions just at the end. So, we do want them to give some context and have that opportunity to just further to explain what those pre-populated numbers mean. That kind of makes up what the first real section is.
There are a few questions, and you referred to this, that talk about reimbursement or going back. And I think we need to be pretty clear. It looks like in 79-922, it talks about a 5-year average. Is that kind of how far back they can go for reimbursement? Or is that more just to determine their need and prioritization?
Yeah, I think the bill seems to give the division a fairly good amount of rulemaking authority in this case. So I think we can decide that. What does any pass mean? It does mention a lot of calendar year. Do we want to say 12 months? I mean, I think I would maybe lean on our sheriffs or you all to kind of identify what is the need, how many unpass. I mean, are some of you counties sitting on 10-year-old pass expenses that are pretty significant? Do you have the documentation?
I'd imagine there's a lot of SAR teams who haven't been reimbursed for stuff for 10, 12 years, but I think, I don't know, I think I'd leave that to, like you said, Sheriff Glover or Sheriff Curtis to give us some impact to say, previous 2 years is probably sufficient or something like that. I would hesitate to say, hey, let's go 10. It can get crazy, right? I think a year or 2 years might be more applicable.
I think taking into account what you just mentioned, that rolling 5-year average. So if you're going to go back 3 years for somebody versus 2 years for someone else, if they've got a higher 5-year rolling average, then that would be a nuance that you'll consider as a
Yeah. Okay.
One second, Brandy.
Oh, Brandy, is your hand still up, or did you have a comment? I think it was left up.
Sorry.
You're good. Okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail. Let's keep going.
No, you're perfect. This is the kind of conversation that we want, and again, seeking your feedback. Any notes that you have be really, really helpful.
We're gonna have a lot of questions for you all at the end of the day.
But to kind of keep on going with this, again, just kind of, we already touched on a few of these points. And then does your county plan to share funding with the special district? Because that's something that's outlined in the bill. It'd be important and helpful to know. And then total request amount for just the entirety of the application. And kind of before I move on, I know I do have Seth online. I kind of want to kind of call on him just to kind of see if there's, if this is something that any of this information is stuff that we can get from the state auditors.
Well, we have our form out there already for what we're currently collecting. And we have the authority to change that form. We typically try to do that. We have a conference that's in May of each year if we have to update that. So if there are things that information that you want from those counties to be added to that already form that's already required to be reviewed, and we can be the one stop to collect all that and facilitate that, we're happy to add that in there. I think the biggest question is just what would the board want added to that? It's more of an offer to make things easier and not make it more cumbersome. So we can add to that. We can take things away. I think we had some good success this year. We got everybody in there and this is just the second year, and we didn't have any real big pushback of, hey, we hate the form or whatever. But if we can add, if you need specific numbers right now, some of the information on search and rescue is voluntary. We didn't require counties to put that in there, but we did put a placeholder for it so they could provide that information. If it's going to be used in this instance as criteria for a grant or anything else like that, we can make those fields required, just to make things easier. So,
Brandy, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to emphasize the importance of this work that the state auditor will be doing. Throughout this process, counties come a little bit under fire, or a lot under fire, for reports that previously were required to be filed with LFA that they were unaware of and were not filing. I don't think anyone intentionally was not compliant. I think there was just a lack of awareness. And in our effort, we were actually moving it and requesting that this be part of the reports that county auditors are already required to file with the state auditor's office. So that's a priority. And then the second thing is the previous forms that LFA were requiring didn't capture the data that was helpful in the conversations anyway. So what Seth is talking about becomes really important, that this board needs to be mindful of the initial intent of what we're trying to accomplish and what data would be helpful in order to make those decisions going forward. So I think that this piece of it we'll probably have to monitor pretty closely, and that form that Seth is mentioning will need to be updated from time to time to make sure we're capturing what we hope to, and also that it's kind of streamlined with what county auditors are already accustomed to doing, so that we are capturing the data in a consistent format from all counties.
And we would only ask if the board, if there's something that needs to be captured on that form, if you have requests that you want to add things in there, that we get those by the end of March, so that we try to update our forms every May, and we use the month of April to try to get those updated. So if you have something you want added or expanded or whatever, let us know by the end of March so that we can get them in there. And we're happy to do a draft version. Hey, we're going to make these changes to it, kick it back to you and let you see it. And if you can give us the thumbs up, hey, this works for us, then we'll push it out there. I just don't want counties to have to submit the same information 4 different ways, because I used to be a county auditor before I came to the state, and I hated that. So I'd rather have it be a one-stop shop.
Which is why we're working so closely with Seth.
Yeah, so is there a way we could get a copy of that?
I can send it
The
over to
county?
you.
Okay. I just think it might be helpful. I don't know that, and I would not want to, as a board, impose any more reporting requirements without, running that through UAC or others who already, and staff, of course, who he's the one who has to implement it. But you'll notice a theme for me, which is streamlining of this stuff. As the one in my agency who fills out grants, I think grants should be 1.5 pages. So we'll try to get there. But you'll notice my theme will be streamlining this, and I really don't want to put any more burdens if the data is already being collected somewhere. So
And that's our hope as well.
yeah, awesome.
And, if we look to at the very start, where it's like eligible county, it's 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th class, but really there's only 2 additional questions, which is, are they imposing the maximum allowable rate of counties here and generated less than 10 million in revenue?
You know, so that's very
Very
easy
easy
to
to
answer, like, pretty quickly, and then the rest should be kind of visitor, search and rescue, kind of those.
Yeah, it's already just kind of pre-filled. So, yes.
Can I ask a quick question? And I was checking in here. So in many counties, including Tooele, the ambulance service is not a special district or a county entity. It's a private entity, right? So it's a hospital-based service, or it's, well, most of them are hospital-based or special service district. Kane County as well, they're a special service district. But they are hospital, but they are a special service. That wouldn't count. They would agree under this, but particularly in Tooele County, those EMS services would be ineligible for funding because they are not government services. Is that correct? I'm gonna get asked that by the Rural EMS Directors Association. I believe they are ineligible for funding. They are for state EMS grants, some of them, not all of them. So I just wanted to clarify that question.
That's a really good.
It seems like we talked about that. Brandy, do you remember?
We absolutely did talk about it, and I want to say we decided it has to be a county. I think that's what the bill says. It has to be a county, because we did talk about some of them that had created special service districts, but I think ultimately we landed on just counties. We can
So
verify that, but
Yeah, so the question here then, they can share the funding with a special service district, right? They just can't share it with a private service, correct? Or that's what it
yeah, and the
seems like.
county has to be the applicant.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I'm wondering now with some of the other bills that have passed, the
Well-
counties that provide ambulance services, some of them have contracts or agreements with private entities to do that.
Yeah, and I think something to keep in mind, this is actually supposed to function more like reimbursement. So they would need to demonstrate their expenses and
Yeah,
essentially be reimbursed for the costs.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. So
it's post-performance.
yes, it's all reimbursement based, right? You, in an EMS situation, STAR situation, it's a little different, but in the EMS situation, they would bill the patient, wouldn't receive reimbursement, and then that might be an eligible expense under this. I don't know. We have to get there. But costs that are non-reimbursable, or they go on a call and the patient is flown, and therefore by Utah law, they can't bill the patient for the call. That cost might be part of this. But yeah, no, I just want to be clear. So I'll let the EMS folks know that private entities would not be eligible for this funding. And it flows from the county down to the EMS provider if they're not a county EMS provider, if they're a city or a special district, right? That sounds like the right flow.
Okay, if the city or the county, if they're paying them, then the city and the county have to still full.
Yes, right. That all makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Love the questions.
Yes. Yeah, it's good discussion, so appreciate it. This is what we're wanting. All right, okay, so we'll move on to this next section, which is going to be those visitor-related emergency costs. And again, as Brandy kind of mentioned online, the idea is kind of that reimbursement costs. But what made this entire kind of grant a little bit more complicated is kind of there's potentials for like projects for like road repair and stuff like that. So we tried to break it out within this application in the sense of kind of defining what costs they're kind of wanting to be reimbursed for. So in this first question, we asked total funding amount requested for visitor related emergency costs. That's the total amount. So that would include, for instance, the reimbursements from SAR and EMS services. And before I get too deep into that, again, this next question is more of that category that might fall under. For instance, we have the reimbursement, ongoing, road repair and upgrades, and ongoing is something that we're going to have a question on here in a minute, but we'll keep going. So again, the total amount of reimbursement for EMS. Okay. So yes.
Yeah, I believe, if memory is serving, the bill gives prioritization of, the road repair and all of that, and kind of how the board should prioritize funding. Is that anywhere within this application so that counties can be aware of like, these are the types of funds that will be utilized first or prioritized first, and then these or otherwise? Is there any way to describe that to counties so they can ensure that they're submitting to the best of their possibility of getting funding?
So that's a really good question, Selena. So within this packet itself, we have kind of a flow chart that kind of describes how that works, and that's something that we can include along with the application itself. But the application was built again with keeping these priorities in mind. I'm really trying to capture just everything in the sense of those individual costs. So that's why it's built out that. But kind of built out. And we can talk about it a little bit more here in a second.
Perfect. Thanks. That looks
Okay.
great.
Question
Yeah,
there.
but to her point, we've got, roads, but I doubt one of these small counties would build repair a road or build a road for emergency purposes unless they knew they had funding, right? So some of this isn't reimbursement, some of this is looking forward and needs based.
Yes, which is again is why the application was hard to kind of build out. It's been a process to see how we can capture all of those different items, from reimbursement to again, ongoing related emergency costs. And then that total amount requested for road repair. Those are different line items within the budget that we would like to see to make it easier for you all to see that and make those decisions and priorities. So that's how this application's been built out. And we started at the top with the visitor related emergency costs, and then we dropped down to related safety costs.
But there could be, though, like to that point, there could be a road situation which the county just repairs immediately because of a dangerous situation. We had actually we talked about this exact issue in our county a couple of weeks ago, but we had an emergency situation with a road that didn't allow us to access a significant area that had a lot of visitors in it, and the county went ahead and just did the dollars to fix the road. They could still apply under this. That was an emergency road repair needed for visitor safety. That would still be eligible. So you may not plan to build a road particularly for it, but you may have emergency costs associated with repairs so that you can access and provide safety to those visitors. So yeah, I see it's in two different places too, and so maybe that helps with the priority.
Yes.
One that would be emergency, one would be
Safety and emergency,
Yes.
there's two transportation.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, maybe kind of give just that 1,000-foot level as well. Like, so yeah, we do have this. This is kind of like our attempt to visualize kind of what the priorities they set up. Yeah, it's almost, you'll see visitor related emergency costs. That's kind of one, and then visitor related safety costs. That's kind of two. And then within those, it's kind of established almost like ABC and then kind of two ABC. But then we have sub priorities, and so sub priorities are kind of feeding into all of those. It's kind of a side priority, like an additional measurement when we get into those. So yeah, there is a lot of prioritization in there. And then to Selena's kind of thought, we plan to have a pretty robust education about this. I think, I connected with Camille from Utah Office of Tourism. I'm going to be presenting to all the directors about this, just really trying to get this word out, attached with a lot of education on how this works, what it's, how you're eligible. So, and then with this, with these, some of this is built in the mind of a grant administrator, and like, we're going to need certain data points to be able to determine stuff, so we are asking for, specific things here, like specific dollar figures for the SAR or the road repairs, just because when we do get that prioritization, maybe we don't have enough money, we need to actually start doing it. Maybe we do have enough money, and it's like everybody gets what they need. So yeah, some of this might make sense as an applicant, some of it kind of makes sense to us as administrators, and we just know how we're going to need to collect the data to enable you to do the best job you can, like as quick as possible. So.
And then to Patrick's point again, for instance, for this first question for the reimbursement amount with SAR and EMS, that's going to fall to this next question, these next two questions, in describing the documented costs that have been incurred for search and rescue efforts and emergency medical services. And then we did include in there, please, attach your ledgers. That way we can see, because essentially it's going to be, just a quick reimbursement, and then it make it a little bit easier. And the overall intention behind this application is that they can apply to everything. And from there is when we can see where funding kind of falls. I can keep going here. So that total amount requested for present and ongoing related emergency costs. And then this next question goes more into the description of those proposed ongoing costs and how that would remedy the overall situations that are going on within the county. Total amount requested for road repair that's related to an emergency cost for SAR and EMS, and then just kind of a quick description of the roads that are being looked at, as well as the overall proposed improvements and how that's going to overall and support SAR and EMS. So those are just kind of those supporting questions for the amounts that are being requested and to provide insight. But is there anything else before I move on to the next section?
Maybe, and this is the world I'm not in very much, but I know as I've worked a little bit with Washington County, it seemed the needs for their search and rescue in some of these situations was, I mean, not always what they needed reimbursed, but what they didn't have. And I'm reading one of the questions that says total amount requested for present or ongoing visitor related emergency conflict. I wonder if maybe a question about needs, in Moab, they need, equipment to go into some of those canyons and things like that, so that we are prepared for situations like that. Maybe a question about that would be helpful.
Specifically, like equipment needs,
Yeah, but I think the purpose of the grant was not to provide that. I think the purpose was simply to reimburse for expenses incurred. So the county would have to purchase that initially and then request a reimbursement.
We do have,
or is it for an actual cost already incurred? So they went on a SAR, couldn't, that cost, X number of dollars, and then they apply for the reimbursement. So I
think you're right, Andy.
don't think it's
This was
supposed
a
to be for
scope,
equipment, right?
this was a scope that, hey, there's roads that are impassable.
Right.
We had that. House Road, we constantly got calls from Sheriff Wimmer saying, my patrol can only go 5 miles an hour on this road. So we had to expense it. That's one of the things that I think Richard brought in, or let me just say the legislation brought in and saying, instead of equipment, let's focus on this, the other equipment is somewhere else.
Yeah.
And at some point, this will transition from a reimbursed base to
Just a
the
standard.
reason we're reimbursing is to help counties and the state project what's going to be needed next year for the
Yeah.
counties. So keep that in mind too, that there'll be this tipping point that occurs.
Yeah.
Eventually that will be on the table for
Yeah.
counties.
Sheriff Curtis, sorry.
I was just gonna mention where that may come into place on that equipment. SAR can get some reimbursement when they do buy new equipment through the SAR reimbursement board, but they don't always get it. It's usually just a small percentage. So that's where that difference could be made up if they bought something and couldn't get it paid for somewhere else.
I would also just direct you, if you go to 799203, that really does kind of outline the uses of the funding. And I think a lot of us thought initially, it's like, okay, this is really a lot of reimbursement, but there is a lot of discussion about kind of present, ongoing,
Sorry, what was that? 79 what?
799203, kind of towards the end. And so, yeah, I think there's the acceptance, like there's going to be a lot of reimbursement. That's kind of what we're here to do, but it does leave space for what I would interpret as like potential equipment purchases. When we're looking at road repairs, maybe when we talk about ongoing, maybe if it's law enforcement, hey, we need an extra, number of staff officers here, so yeah, I think we can be flexible, but it does seem to prioritize reimbursing SAR EMS as like the number one priority.
Glover, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out as it relates to search and rescue reimbursement, the search and rescue board only reimburses like non-core costs that counties incur. So like if our volunteer teams get called out to handle a search and rescue incident, those are the reimbursements that are made through the search and rescue board. So where I think this program is going to bridge a gap for counties, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's kind of part of this discussion as it relates to probably 799203, is there are also a lot of core county costs associated with one of those search and rescue events quite often. Or another example might be, we have deputies that handle search and rescue calls often with EMS resources that we never do a search and rescue call out. And so those costs in those instances wouldn't be reimbursable by the search and rescue board. But I'm under the understanding that those costs would be reimbursable under this program. And I think that's a bridge that needs to be gapped. And I think this is what this program is going to be a benefit to EMS and search and rescue in that regard.
Sheriff, can I ask one clarifying question, just having been familiar in the past with that search and rescue assistance board, it didn't seem to capture the full costs of those search and rescue emergency costs. It was just those that were submitted to the board that qualified for those kinds of reimbursements. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a very strict criteria. Sheriff Curtis chairs that board, so he could chime in if he wants to. There's a very strict criteria as to what we will and will not reimburse. I'm on the board as well. But yeah, it is very limited. So when we look at those reimbursement costs, it's very specific to actual costs reimbursed for volunteer services related to a search and rescue call. And that's all it reimburses. And there's not a lot of money there. I mean, it's like a total of $500,000 or $600,000 a year for the entire state. And so what we do is we prioritize those actual call reimbursements as it relates to the volunteer services, followed up by training costs. If there's money left, then we fund training costs. Beyond that, if there's money left, then we fund equipment requests. And as Sheriff Curtis said, those equipment request reimbursements are pretty limited. We usually get into that. We usually have enough money to just barely to get into that. But the reason why is because the scope of those applications is very limited. And there are a lot of additional costs associated with search and rescue that are just not, they're just not ripe to be dealt with by that particular board. And I think this program is gonna broaden that just a little bit to cover some actual county costs that are impacts from tourism in counties like mine.
Let's hope so. Thank you.
So Sheriff Glover, would reading this, there actually is a little bit more room than I thought. And I'm sure we can talk about this later as well, but maybe in the back of our minds, would you say some priority might be given to more of the equipment needs? I mean, there's, if you read 79.9203, to pay for any present or ongoing visitor-related emergency costs or visitor-related safety costs. That could be equipment acquisition in my mind. Is that something that we should prioritize here, Sheriff, or do you think focus on the actual?
I think it's going to depend on how much money exists in the fund, and then this is where the rubber is going to meet the road probably. But yeah, I agree. I think there's wiggle room to get there if that's what we want to do. But the prioritization is going to be the tricky part, in my opinion. This is my opinion, but for this board, we're going to have to prioritize costs because, like, one road project could probably take all the money. And so, the prioritization is going to be the tricky part. And certainly I think, search and rescue equipment is expensive. Law enforcement equipment's expensive. EMS equipment is expensive. So we're just going to have to prioritize those and ramp up to what actually makes a big difference, I hope.
Trash trucks are more than ambulances now. I just want to point that out. Those are expensive pieces of equipment.
Our solid waste. A lot of this stuff, this is a really great conversation. Like, this is a lot of stuff that we can really hash out in our admin role as well.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep delaying us. I just have a lot of questions about it. So
our next meeting is really going to be looking at the admin rules. So we get brand new like this. So this is really helpful. And then just to kind of give a little context for Sheriff Glover, it's like how much is in the account right now. It looks like there is 6.8 million. So there is a significant amount.
That's one road.
Yeah,
Small road.
if you're lucky. So, to your original question, it will depend on what county you are and what your allocation ends up being in the future.
Right.
Because that's I keep bringing this up, but it'll be, in 5 years, hopefully, we'll have a year or two under our belt with just having it been automated.
Yeah.
So the counties that get the most will have more options in terms of equipment.
Yeah.
And capital expenditures.
No, that makes sense. You can always move the funds around at a county level too, to make sure that you're covering the costs you need to. So using them for what you applied for, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you should use other funds that are movable. So
there's actually a question in the application that kind of gets to that as well.
Sorry, Jorge.
No, you guys are perfect. This is, like I said, this is what we're here for, and it's really helpful in informing us how we can adjust the application. Okay, so I will keep going. So again, visitor-related safety costs. This is after the emergency costs. And again, we broke this out into essentially 3 different categories, which is how the bill breaks it out. So that first question, we have the total amount that's being requested for visitor-related safety costs. That second question is kind of breaking it out into solid waste disposal operations, law enforcement, and those road repair and upgrades. And again, the mindset that we kind of have right now is essentially to, like I said at the very beginning, is to, they're able to apply for kind of all of this, but we can kind of see how that kind of breaks out. Because again, the goal is for every county to hopefully, receive some sort of funding. But again, we can keep going. So that total amount requested for solid waste disposal operations, we kind of had a question on the proposed use of funds, and this is replicated throughout these next two categories, but the proposed use of the funds to support overall solid waste disposal operations, how current solid waste disposal operations are and how it results in unsafe conditions for residents, visitors, because of increased outdoor recreation. And then kind of explaining how the request would mitigate the effects of those. And again, just having the ledger that kind of explains a little bit more. And then it's the same thing for the total request amount for law enforcement, is kind of this more describing the activities that are restrained because of visitor activity, the types of incidences that could potentially result because of an incident, increased visitor activity, and how that results into those unsafe conditions, and then explaining how the requested funds could potentially help that in a positive way, whether that's an ongoing or one-time funding. And then we have that request amount for the total repair, for road repair and upgrades that is related to visitor-related safety costs. So we broke that out into those two different sections, for instance, the emergency-related safety costs, and then or emergency costs, and then visitor-related safety costs. Go ahead, Sheriff.
I just had a quick question. When an application comes in, are we going to get multiple applications from a county, for example? Like, I'll just use myself as an example. Are we going to be seeing as a board a search and rescue application, or an application from Kane County related to search and rescue, or the sheriff's office, a second one from an issue with solid waste, a third one from a roads issue? And if so, or are we going to require that all of those requests are put into one application? And I guess my main question is along those lines, can we require the county, and maybe it says that in here, to prioritize, assuming they're not going to get everything they want, can we ask them to prioritize in order what their own priorities are, so that it helps us grapple with that?
So that's a really good question, Sheriff Glover. So I'm trying to look for it in the bill. It does mention that an eligible county can only apply for one application at a time, and they have to expend all the funds before they can apply for another application. The intention behind this application currently, the best way that I felt like we could make it more flexible is to have them, be able to apply for everything under one application. And then your second part to that question, where having that prioritized list of their own thoughts and process funds, their own prioritized list of the funds, was kind of a question that we have towards the end of this, of like whether we should include a question about partial funding, where, if they're willing to accept partial funding, and then the second question maybe being more of like the actual prioritized list of what is absolutely necessary. I hope that answers your question, but again, that's kind of the tension and the mindset.
Can I assume that we're going to review all applications at one time and make a determination? Do we know when that is? Is that, I don't see it outlined, but we need to determine that then.
Yeah, we have dates lined up, and I think Sheriff Glover, like, we can certainly put that question on there. I would ask them to prioritize what are their most important, number 1, 2, 3, etc. And we do have kind of what the bill is asking us to prioritize, and in a sense, it shakes out like nobody gets visitor-related safety costs until everybody gets visitor-related emergency costs, and then within visitor-related safety costs, there's not really much of a prioritization within that clump. But SAR EMS is number 1 across the board. Road upgrades for emergency costs would be prioritized over safety costs. But even within all of this, if we want to ask them, like, okay, if we did get to the point where we need to determine, we have flexibility, what's your priority? Absolutely. You know, we definitely want to do that. I think after talking with Sheriff Curtis and Brandy, we kind of were landing on like launching this like July 15th and maybe closing it August 30th. We want to make sure that the counties have enough time, that they've gone through their own kind of end of fiscal year reporting. You know, but that's still tentative, but that's kind of, you know, Sheriff Curtis, Brandy, feel free to give comment on those dates, but that's kind of what we tentatively decided, opening on July 15th after the fiscal year, closing at August 30th, hoping a month and a half is going to be enough. With distribution by, you know, hopefully October 1st.
And to Brandy's point earlier too, the county is the only eligible entity.
Correct.
They have to be the applicant, even though the money might go to a district or.
Yeah.
So I would imagine it'd be so much easier for us if there was just one application with all of their requests, right?
Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah, I think that.
But that answered my question to a certain degree. So we're gonna prioritize visitor-related emergency costs that, you know, those requests are coming in first. When they get funded, then we'll move to the next tier. If they get funded, we move to the next tier is what I think I heard you say.
Yeah, I mean, then that's just kind of going off of the bill language. I mean, I think we can have the discussion, right? You know, is this prioritization matrix correct? You know, do we need to try to figure out some form of cleanup? But just kind of going off the bill, that's kind of how it's lined everything up.
Well, I think my short conversation I had with Senator Vickers as well, that was his intent.
Yeah.
His intent was SAR, EMS initially, and then we start talking about road, solid waste and all the other things. So that, I think that priority aligns with what I believe the sponsor's intents were, so.
And I think I do want to mention that I think we all know that it is, everything that potentially comes in as a request is all extremely important, especially for, you know, the county's needs. That's just kind of how it's listed out and kind of something that we have to keep doing the way that the bill is kind of structured, so. Is there any other questions related to this specific section of the application?
No, can I throw a curveball real quick and tell me if I'm wrong? And
Andy, you're the chair. You
I'm
can't-
so- no, maybe you guys might unelect me by the end of this meeting. So one of the things I thought initially when I read this was confusing to me was that it's SAR/EMS. SAR has a lot of costs that are not EMS related, search wise, stuff like that. And EMS has a lot of costs that are not SAR necessarily related. And I'm wondering if you want to split those categories out, right? 50% of my calls that are to visitors are at hotels, right? The search and rescue team doesn't come, but the sheriff's office might, as to Sheriff Glover's point, right? A deputy might show up and assist. That's a visitor related cost. We want law enforcement on our calls. And so like they may show up at a SAR may not be there, but deputies might, or city police officers might. So I'm wondering if that should be a separate category to help capture those costs. Because I think if you're reading this as a county, you're going to say, okay, I can only apply for SAR costs that had an EMS component, or EMS costs that had a search and rescue, or that were search and rescues. So I think it would be easier to split those out. Again, I'm not gonna, if that's not popular, that's okay. We don't have to.
So
I just think it might be easier.
I think a really easy way to kind of maybe break it out and be able to kind of potentially see it would be on like the budget. And they, you know, they're breaking it out each individually on like what it is, but towards the end, the actual total amounts, I think would be the same because it's a reimbursement.
So your guys' point in putting in the same category was because that was the initial priority. They just are all in that same.
With the reimbursement itself.
Okay.
But you would, I think we can request that you can break out each individual.
Yeah, as long as
on the
counties
budget.
know they can apply for a SAR call that was not, that didn't have a medical, you know, side, like, I think that's fine. I don't want people to get confused and not apply to get reimbursed for a call that may have taken much longer than a medical call, right? You could search for somebody for days. That expense is massive compared to some guy with a broken leg, right? Those are usually a little more straightforward.
Well, I think to your point, I think even if we don't separate them as questions, which we easily can, you know, that's not an issue at all. And it's good for clarity if we can do that. But maybe we can just mimic the bill language where it's pretty clear, like conducting search and rescue efforts or providing emergency medical services where, you know, we have a firm separation.
Either's fine with me. I just want to bring that up. I just don't want to confuse confuse that. I don't know how the rest of
No,
it
that's
works.
That's a great
Really good point. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question real quick. I didn't see anything in the bill. I would imagine search and rescue costs would include if you had to pay a helicopter bill as a search and rescue team because they're helping you search. Would that be a cost incurred that could be reimbursable? Okay. All right.
I feel like we have a lot of eligibility. Yeah, a lot of it that's like with any pass unpaid, you know.
Okay.
There's,
I think it's anything pertaining to that.
yeah.
I just know those can get really pricey for
And
teams.
here's the other, just I'll throw this out there. We in rule can also put some parameters on that too.
Okay.
What is a max?
Right.
Percentage of the total, there's lots of different ways to make sure that that doesn't go into something you don't want.
Yeah, okay.
Well, next time we meet, we'll get to dive into the rule.
Okay.
Future Andy is somebody to think about.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions on this, any of this, those two sections or? The last one is a lot simpler in the sense of the, required supportive materials. These are just items that we thought could be potentially important to provide more insight. So for instance, your pictures, this is more specific to road repair. If they are wanting to do road repair project or upgrade project, we want to kind of see maybe some site plans, a map of what the road is looking like, just to kind of get a general idea, give you a better idea and help with better decisions there as well. The invoices and proof of payments for SAR and EMS reimbursements. So anything that they're wanting on to get reimbursed, just to kind of have all those invoices, make it a little bit easier there. And then the budget sheet, of course, budget narrative, which just kind of gives a little bit more detail on those specific items. And then this is one that I think we can scratch.
Yeah, that's just a hanger on from one of our other applications.
Yes.
I don't think we'll make these applicants go through our compliance checklist.
And then letters of support. This is a question that we kind of have, but I can get into it here in a second. Statement of responsibility. That's another one that's one of those hanger on ones that we have from the other application we wanted to take off. And then W-9, just so that way we can actually pay them. So
What would a letter of support look like? Like I know
And
your
that's-
guys' other grants, I know I've written some for our sheriff's department. What would that look like in this case?
that's
Yeah.
That's our question. So, for example, with our Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant, we require a tourism economic development letter because it's coming from TRT. For our off-highway vehicle recreation grant, we require an OHV user group letter because it's coming from those registrations. And so this was kind of one we wanted to ask you all, like, do you think we need letters of support here? If so, is it coming from like a commissioner? Is it coming from the sheriff? Is it coming from, EMS? Like, I'm just not sure if you do want, is it coming from tourism directors, right? We don't need letters, there's nowhere in here that says we need letters, right? And again, this is something that we could address in rules, but we just left it on there so we could have this discussion. What do letters look like
Does
in this
it,
case?
does it help in
Yeah.
your decision making?
It would, when we tie it back to the questions of explaining your needs, right? If you have support, so I don't know that we make it mandatory, but it's certainly optional to have those letters, maybe not even of support, but of this is what we really need from those who need it. So I'm not opposed to them, but maybe not as a letter of support.
Oh, it's,
I guess I'm a little down. I don't think we need it. If you're filing for SARS, that's pretty upfront. EMS pretty upfront. Roads pretty upfront. Who are you gonna get it from? The roads department? Of course, they're gonna want roads and
Yeah.
so I'm not sure how applicable it is to this because these are pretty vital things for safety. But that's just me.
if it were from a county commissioner,
Well, they're the ones making the.
They're the ones that have
oh,
to
they
make,
are making that.
so the county has to make the application. So now you're getting it from the county. Of course, they're gonna write it.
Sheriff Glover?
Yeah, I was just gonna say some of what was already said. I'm not sure that I love the letters of support in this particular context. I feel like, I mean, who would we get it from? In the other grants, you're trying to get letters of support from other agencies or entities that might be affected by what you're asking for. So like I might get a letter of support from the Bureau of Land Management or the National Park Service, but I've never really loved that part of even those grants. I think the grant should stand on its own 2 feet. I'm not a big fan of endorsements in elections, and that's kind of what this is to a certain degree. So I'd probably oppose the letters, or at least make them optional. Optional would be fine. If there's a reason for a support letter that one of the applicants thinks is important, I think that'd be fine to consider, but.
Selena?
One for consideration would be the county's Tourism Tax Advisory Board. They're going through with the county's TRT funding and making their prioritization list, some of which includes mitigation dollars out of the project funds. And so that could be a good avenue of demonstrating collaboration of how the county is working together with the established funds of transient room tax and then this grant. So that's my recommendation, is maybe to consider the Tourism Tax Advisory Board as an option, not as a mandatory.
Yeah, and I think my thoughts on it are along, actually all of those. I think all of those are good things. I don't want to create divisions here, but I think if you're going to prioritize a road, you ought to have really good letters saying why we need this road. If you're not going to pay your SAR team that year and you want a road instead, you better have really good backup documentation that you need that.
I think that's a good point. Maybe that letter of support comes from the sheriff to support,
Right.
hey, yeah, we think that the road is very important. Access is an issue.
Right.
Accessing patients is a huge issue,
Right.
and vice versa. You know,
Yeah.
So maybe that's something, again, not mandatory, but they could certainly be, add to the story.
I think it's all part of making sure that the applicant knows that it's their responsibility to show, because we're gonna have to weight it as well, right? We're
Yeah.
gonna have to determine who's needing it more, so.
Sure, Chris?
Thank you. I think it just goes back to the comment earlier about having the county say, hey, this is our priority and here's why. Maybe that's the letter you need to say, hey, here's our project, here's what's most important to us, here's why. I mean, I think it goes back to that. That way hopefully those county commissioners, those department heads have all got together. Those different offices have sat down and said, this is our priority. They've got with the TRT board when they do this application, and they're actually saying, this is our priority.
Steph, go for it.
Yeah. So just so you're aware, on the current application for, or the current report for TRT and TRCCA expenditures, at the bottom of that report, we were requested specifically by different groups and some members of the legislature to include the part on the bottom of that where it says that the Tourism Tax Advisory Board for the county provided the recommendations to the county on the use of the tourism tax, and reference that meeting, so that to show that they had input in it, because of the perception that maybe those boards are not receiving all of the information or that. So I do think that including the Tourism Tax Advisory Board would help alleviate some of the concerns at the state level that tourism group is not aware of or included in the process. So, and that, I'm not saying that as it has to, but there is a perception that they may be cut out of some of the decision-making. So including them in that might make things happier and alleviate future changes that might come if they weren't included. So.
It does add, I mean, I sit on one of those boards for Washington County, and I think it would be helpful to have them as part of this, because part of this is showing why TRT can't cover the cost. And in fairness, every county, at least every tourism office is going to say we can't, because we would rather use those funds to do what the TRT funds are meant for, in promotion and, you know, bringing more visitors to our areas.
I think that's one of the benefits of this grant, is that there's no split between, for TRT money, there's no split between the promotion side and the mitigation side. And so that I have no problems including them. I don't know that it's necessary, but I think that I know ours, I think every county does, right? That's a requirement that the advisory, ours is called the travel council. I'm not sure what they're called everywhere, but like that board submit their TRT proposed splits. Is that every county's requirement to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think maybe one important question we have to talk about this, like, is this going to help you make your decision?
Yeah, and I don't know that it does. Go ahead, Sheriff Albert.
I was just gonna say to Jason's point a minute ago, as it relates to the letters or some functional way for us as board members to be able to see that the key parties involved in a request are on board with the county's request. I'm not opposed to it in that realm. So for example, if we had letters or just some way to check some boxes or whatever on the application, for example, if Kane County is applying for a roads project this year, and as a board member, if I can see that the sheriff's on board with this, the local garbage district director is on board with this, and the EMS director is on board with this, then it's an easy decision for me to say that in the realm of our priorities as a board to fund the project, we're not causing a rift within that county or causing a problem within that county. So I like it in that context. As far as the tourism advisory committees go, I certainly think that could be an optional piece of information that we get. I just would say that they are advisory in nature. And so the county commission, sometimes those advisory boards, we have a really great one right now, but there's been years in my history where they really start taking more than an advisory role and they start demanding their priorities. So I think it's great to involve them and for us to understand if they're on board with a project request, but we need to be a little bit careful about letting that get out of hand.
Okay, so a prioritization letter from the county, I think that's probably fair and agreeable to everybody. Maybe other things is optional, right? If the county says, hey, Tourism Advisory Board, let's put a letter together where you guys support this too. Can you review our application? I think that just speaks volumes more to maybe that county having everybody more on board with how the money's getting spent.
It would affect my decision, knowing that the tourism advisory board supported it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think with a lot of this, as part of our education as well, we can have it be optional, but we will include information about consider getting a letter from the Tourism Tax Advisory Board. There's a lot we can do to just kind of help make sense of what we're asking and what may be beneficial.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions on the specific section? Concerns, and from there we can kind of move on, and we have our own questions that we'd love to kind of help inform our own, decision making and how we write this application and make adjustments.
I do have maybe just a comment. I think the application obviously is done filling in information. I think it should include our expectations. So for example, if a road is approved, are there requirements with bids? And obviously, I don't want to just reimburse some guy who went out with a shovel, for $50,000 or something like that. I think we need to make it very clear that this is a reimbursable and that there needs to be certain steps taken with bids or, receipts.
Maybe they just do the same thing that counties have to do. That you have to go out and get 3 bids. If it's a sole source, then they have to show why it was a sole source.
I think that makes sense.
I think some of that was covered in the receipts.
Yes.
And
it was pretty vague in the receipts.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to make it really clear, because if they come back year after year and every year we're reimbursing for things that were really vague or, we question, I think that, would impact us giving that county more money, right?
Let me ask a question then. Is it myopic to think or to process on a certain road that you put in phases? For this first phase, this is what we're writing an application for. Next year, it'll be phase 2. Would that be objectionable?
I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that we're being responsible with this tax that's being collected.
It's not just avoiding any abuse
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
or even unintentional market forces that sometimes it just happens.
Yeah.
My bill's flowing in this particular,
I mean, it's supposed to be used for very specific reasons, and if it's not, or not being used within guidelines, we need to make that clear that they won't get money next year, right? Or
it might be a really heavy burden to try to have them produce all that documentation. But I do know that like the counties are required, counties, city, all government is required to follow the purchasing policies by the state. And so it's probably not, they've probably already gone through that process. So maybe it's not that big of a deal. Please include your information, you know, that you made to purchase this or something.
Or certify.
Or yeah, certify that you went through the purchasing policy of your county or whatever. Sheriff Glover?
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest some certification process because we all have procurement requirements and policies. And I don't really want to go through every single detail of an RFP or whatever else that somebody put out on a road project as a board member. But I do agree that we need to certify that process is taking place and is sound, because it could get to be a problem.
Because I feel like that could just be a question, just like I attest that this has gone through the process. Because I think, you know, and this does lead into some of the questions we did have as it involves like what documentation are we expected to collect. So when we run our other grant programs, you know, oftentimes we do lean on like, oh, it's a county, like we trust a county, a city, they have a procurement, we're not as worried. But, you know, certain, you know, like nonprofits, we will request, you know, invoices, bids, just some of these things to help make sense. You know, with road projects, you know, I think our expectation would be some sense of a site plan, some sense of a, you know, a reasonable estimate. You don't want them just to make up numbers, have sense of those. I think one question is, particularly with the search and rescue, with the reimbursements, like, and maybe this is for, I guess, for all of you, but what can we expect for documentation and when can we expect that? Like, because I think we initially set this up as like, hey, we're going to request, you know, arbitrary number, you know, $50,000 on these 3 rescues, you know, what's the documentation that we can expect to get, you know, that it's not going to be cumbersome, that's available. That's kind of what I'm looking for. What do we need to make the correct determination on those reimbursements? Because I just don't know. You know, are we collecting payrolls? Are we, you know, lifelines? This is a lot. So if anybody can help on that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are, and again, I think the sheriffs will have a lot more information. I know my county, the way they collect that data is they just have a call report. Says they were paged, you know, the incident ID number, how many people responded, how many hours they were on the call. Every call just gets a call report. And I think that's probably the easiest. If you're going to be reimbursing personnel, that's the easiest, because you know how many hours they were there. Go ahead, Sheriff.
Yeah, so I basically agree with that. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work as it relates to the Search and Rescue Reimbursement Board and to supplanting. The bill says you can't supplant, which you would expect. And so I'm not exactly sure how we're going to parse that out. This is going to be a little bit tricky, but yeah, you're right. So every search and rescue call has essentially an incident number, a case number associated with it. And then, you know, sheriffs are going to have to get, you know, better at accounting for the data as far as what the actual costs are on that search and rescue call. But when I say supplanting, the reason I bring that up is because some of those costs would be, you know, actual county core costs like deputies and equipment and services that are used, you know, resources, maybe a helicopter, whatever it is, that may or may not be reimbursable by the Search and Rescue Board, or may not be requested to be reimbursed by the Search and Rescue Reimbursement Board. And so how we parse those two things out, it's going to be a little bit interesting, and I'm not exactly sure what that looks like as of right now today.
Thank you. And, you know, I think, you know, one thing that we did as we were looking at that, because we know they are, you know, some of these have been reimbursed in some partial form, but, you know, it does say any past unpaid, which I read as like, okay, we can't like obviously double dip with some of these funds if we want to go like straight letter of the bill language. But, you know, again, I only know what I know. So
yeah, and as I was reading that, when we were talking about like, and EMS is a slightly different animal, obviously, because we can bill a patient. And I think, as far as I know, every actual EMS agency in the state that's a transporting EMS agency does bill for mine. I don't think there's one that doesn't. But you know, whether you get paid or not is a coin toss, right? And so, how much information am I allowed to disclose saying I didn't get reimbursed? I mean, I'll probably have to like withhold names. So like how that data looks when it gets submitted might be a little bit of a different animal. But Sheriff.
Yeah, Andy, so I had a question on that. So as it relates to EMS reimbursements, you know, there's like actual costs and billable costs.
Yeah.
How's the board gonna treat those kinds of nuances?
No, I agree with you, right? Because the billable cost is so much higher on purpose because it only gets reimbursed at a quarter of what you bill, right? So I think you have to put actual costs. I think you have to count the hours your staff were there, what that cost was, the cost of any equipment or bandaging or medications. I think you're gonna have to.
Does that
be pretty
include
detailed.
dispatch also?
I don't know if dispatching costs are under here. I saw you laugh there, Chris. That's a good question, actually. I don't know that it would include being able to pay for the dispatcher, but maybe.
If there's like an extended dispatch established for a long-term incident, maybe. But
Yeah.
Probably not that.
I don't
It's a
see where it's
special
excluded.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It's not technically excluded, but it is kind of a county court cost. If it's a county dispatcher, a state dispatcher, the county's still paying in.
On a
So,
long-term incident, you might have a dispatcher dedicated to that.
sure, something that
Maybe
lasts
that.
more than an operational period or something. Yeah.
So this is maybe.
Oh, just go ahead, Sheriff.
I was just gonna say, as it relates to dispatch, at least in my experience, like if what we're trying to do with this fund is mitigate or mitigate tourism impacts to our communities that fit into these categories, dispatch is a factor. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Like those costs in my county, we would not have to pay near as much money in dispatch services if we didn't have as many visitors. I'm sure Grand County's in a similar space. So it's a fair question we may need to decide on.
I don't want to look at it case by case, you know, every single person that was rescued with EMS. I mean, can't we just ask them to show their losses from EMS? I mean, as a whole?
That is what it's asking for. It's asking for the totals. It's just how do you back up that data?
Yeah, if
And
you're
how
gonna-
do you show that that's your true loss?
Alright.
And maybe there's a factor that we could figure for every hour of a search and rescue, there's a % dispatch cost associated. You know, like it's for every hour you're on a SAR, there's a quarter hour dedicated to dispatch as well, because Sheriff Glover's right. I mean, dispatch, and it's only getting more expensive. And the other funds that used to pay for dispatch, they're getting smaller. And so it's tough.
As a county councilman, I'm telling you, dispatch has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
With all the towers and dishes, the upgrades that you're required to, the fiber optic that has to go to it.
Yeah, it's not cheap. One radio is like multiple thousands of dollars, right?
And I do like the simplicity.
the supporting of that
Case.
Yeah, I think that's an easy way to account for it, because it's gonna be really hard to decide. You know, this incident took more dispatching than normal because of recreation versus one that it's just gonna be difficult to decide that.
Is there not like a financial statement by county that shows the income from EMS and the actual expenses paid, you know, for labor, for dispatch?
Less than 50% of the counties in Utah run EMS.
And I would say consider the return on the investment of that analysis.
Yeah.
This is starting to sound really intensive in terms of what you're looking at. What's, again, in the interest of streamlining, like you said in the beginning, I think is important. So it would, if you decided maybe dispatch, although as has been said, it is an impact. Maybe we set that aside so that it's still apples to apples and we can keep things
around,
pretty, pretty simple. An assumption, basically.
So as far as to your first question, the data that's needed to justify the cost, I think it's maybe incident number by incident number. That way, if there was ever a question, those things are grandma requestable, I believe in every county, as long as it's not like an ongoing investigation sort of thing. So, if the public wanted to verify that King County actually spent that money, they could grandma request and say how long that call took, or me, they could grandma request our documents and say, yep, Andy actually went on that call. So that's probably the easiest way to manage that.
The other one too that I think of with some of these is things like Raspberry Days in Ridge County, UTV takeover in Washington County, those big events that are almost all visitor related impacts. Joke Joe's Valley Fest, things like that.
Yeah. And that's also one of the reasons I want to separate these out, because EMS does a ton of, and law enforcement as well. They'll do a ton of event kind of things where those are costs to our county, that many times are not reimbursable, right? And so it's, yeah, or sometimes they are if you're charging the event, but a lot of counties don't.
Right. And you're not getting all of it.
No, yeah. So,
So I have maybe like a quick question for maybe both Sheriff Glover and Curtis. Is there, and just in general, is there a way that we could potentially get what's eligible and what's ineligible from the other application to maybe see how that can maybe inform what would be eligible here, as well as maybe what maybe a sample report could potentially look like? Is that fair to ask for the?
Absolutely. We have that. I think if you've been talking with Julia, she can give you an absolute, this is what's allowed, what's not. There's an actual cost breakdown on those. So.
Julie's been really helpful. I think she's on vacation for yeah. She's on an awesome vacation right now.
I will get it to you, Jorge. I will get it to you. I can make, I think I should have most of it already anyway.
Okay.
So, but yeah.
Thank you. That just could help inform a little bit more into that.
I mean, I can give you a quick rundown if you want me to real quick, or we can just wait because it could be a little extensive.
what time is it? I think I'd really like to know, because I think we might be able to streamline this a little bit, Sheriff, like.
Okay, I'll just tell you real quick, the things that are allowed, actual costs on searches. So if it's directly tied to the cost of function of it, so say fuel, if we damage something in the course of a cost, we do that. If we had to rent a boat or fill tanks for scuba or whatever it may be, if we have to replace a rope, something like that, that's all reimbursable. Then actual cost for training. So we do, if you go to a certification course, a CPR course, a scuba course, high angle, whatever it may be, that's directly related to search and rescue, we will do that. We will not pay for membership dues. So if there's some groups that are members of the Rocky Mountain Rescue Association, we do not pay for those dues. Those are not allowed. We do not pay for maintenance. So oil changes, new tires, if you just wore out your tires on a machine, we don't pay for that. But we will pay for fuel that was used during it. The other option we'll do with that is we'll say if you document the actual miles, we'll do what their county rate is for mileage, and instead of the actual cost of fuel. One of the interesting caveats of that is like snowmobiles. We will pay for the 2-stroke oil that has to be added to the fuel because it's part of the fuel system, make it work. Trying to think what else you may want to know. Then equipment, it's the same thing. We've been running into an issue where we've had some high dollar ticket items purchased and then we run out real quick. So it kind of becomes hard to do that. But what we do is we break everything down into, if it's actually tied to a search, we will pay it. We will not pay for deputies' wages. We will not pay for EMS wages. We don't pay for state helicopter wages. We do try and help out with the fuel on state helicopter if we can. A lot of counties have purchased fuel trailers so they can actually do that and have that out there to help save those costs. There's some things that we do pay for, like if you have, we've started seeing some things like Starlinks and CalTopo, SARTopo, InReach, those type of things, so we can continue with our communications. We've been paying for those as well because they're actually related to and used during the searches. Trying to think what else did I miss, Sheriff Glover?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Just where I think we need to, decide the difference is that the Search and Rescue Board doesn't pay for any core county costs really. So these are search and rescue volunteer responses mostly that we're paying for, and then a little bit of the infrastructure that surrounds the ability to do that. So it doesn't really mitigate in any way tourism impacts related to search and rescue, the search and rescue reimbursement board doesn't really mitigate that in any way. It just covers, what actually happens.
It's actual reimbursement. I think about the only thing that may be considered mitigation is when a county purchases equipment, we need to replace some four-wheelers. We buy the four-wheelers, we submit, hopefully we get 20%, 25% back on that cost.
And one thing on that is we, as a search and rescue board, we ask that the entity that's requesting reimbursement for a piece of equipment like an ATV, we ask that they have already exhausted their options through the other DNR grants and things like that, and that they give us the documentation to show that, they already got 50% of the cost of that reimbursed through this search or through the DNR program. And so now we're just looking at the remaining balance that we would help them reimburse within the formula.
Yep.
So I have maybe a crazy idea that might streamline this and make it easy. Do all of you pay your SAR members when they're on a call? No, you guys don't. Okay.
I don't know. I think Grand County is the only one that actually pays some SAR members. Some, they don't pay them all, if I understand right, but nobody else.
Every SAR member is paid when they're on a call, not for training or anything else, but when they go on a call, they're on the clock. 'Cause I was gonna say you could almost limit this to deputy wage reimbursement for search and rescue calls or search and rescue member wage reimbursement. But if you guys aren't paying, then that's not a good metric. So okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
But
in that
Andy,
case,
that's an interesting point. The point you just made is kind of the point I'm trying to make, and that is that we have deputies that go handle search and rescue calls on the clock every day. And so not every call, in fact, probably a small percentage of the calls of the actual search and rescue calls, visitors from out of town, out of state, out of country, that we're going to rescue on a backcountry, basis. Deputies handle most of those calls. And the reality is in the spirit of mitigation, I wouldn't need near as many deputies if I didn't have such a high call volume to go handle those calls. And that's what I think this money could help alleviate for counties. I think that's the actual design.
Sheriff, would you be able to put a percentage on that deputy's wage and say X percentage of this deputy's wage is pretty much dedicated to, like, I'm trying to figure out an easy way to do this reimbursement rather than like, oh, they spent 30 minutes on a SAR this day and 25 minutes on this day and 4.5 hours on this day, right? Could it be done by a percentage?
I think the onus has to be back on the agency to request reimbursement and yeah, I guess we can ask how we want that done. For me, I think the more accurate way to do it, but rather than a percentage of time used or whatever, would be on an actual call with an actual incident number. You could see, which deputies were involved in that response, and then pull out their hourly rate, their total hourly rate cost or whatever else on that search and rescue call that's not reimbursable by the search and rescue board. And then that could be the reimbursement request. And I think that's the only way to do it, because otherwise, I don't want to say people would game the system, but it would be pretty hard to get accurate as it relates to like a percentage of the cost of the deputy or how much of their time is used for search and rescue. That would be kind of hard.
Okay. All right. This is going to be the meat of the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
The data that needs to come in order to justify the request.
Really complicated.
Yeah, and deciding what is the return on the investment that you're putting into that analysis. Like, you really dig into a lot of details. What are you getting out of that?
There's grants I don't apply for simply because the reporting is so onerous. It's like, why would I don't want that?
Well, again, go back to Patrick's original point. What is going to give this board the best chunks of information, raw, wholesale, to make the decisions? And drilling into some of these details is not going to add a ton to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm pretty granular on things. Is that what the 10 is? But
Right. Go ahead, Sheriff.
So just real quick, I was going to say this data, that's what legislature is asking for. That's what everybody is really wanting to know. What's this impact? That's why we're asking for these specifics. So I think sometimes it makes it easier on us to do a percentage and it'll clean it up. But ultimately what it comes down to is we really need to see what those impacts are to our communities, to our counties. And that's why we have these different categories, because we're hearing that those are impacts. We need the data to support it. And this is a way to encourage each of those counties to actually dig in, get that data. We have a clear, consistent group who collects it. We can get that data and then we can find a way to give them some money back to help out those counties and help them mitigate it. So ultimately we do got to get the data one way or the other. We need that data.
Well said.
Yeah, so Sheriff Kurtz, I guess one of the biggest troubles with that is kind of like what Sheriff Glover was saying was he has to have more dispatchers, more deputies. And if we're only going to count the time they're actually on a call, that's not the true cost. The cost of readiness associated with it is the true cost. And that's where I struggle to say, we actually have to have 8 more deputies because of SAR, or because of the SAR impact, or even just the visitor impact. But all 8 of, not all of their, how do you account for the cost that you have to have more deputies associated without just saying, well, they only spent 8 hours on the SAR that month, right? I think the cost is actually much greater than the time they spent on the search and rescue. And how can we account for that? And maybe that's beyond the scope of this board. I'm thinking more nationally.
Well, I think
but how do you account for those things?
That 5-year rolling average and how that 5-year rolling average is calculated, what goes into that.
Okay.
Adding in dispatch, adding in, and maybe that's how, incident by incident, you got to do that calculation. It's going to take work, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, there's funding attached, so there's an incentive there.
right.
It's like paying for lifeguards.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cost of being ready is a massive cost.
I mean, we clearly have a lot, to still figure out, but the good news is we have a lot of time. We're in January now. I mean, granted, the next couple months with the session, a lot of people, it's not their own time, but, with a launch on July 15th, I mean, I fully anticipate reaching out to Sheriff Glover, Sheriff Curtis, plenty of times to talk over this stuff. Selena, every single one of you, I hope we can continue to get input on. And I think, we'll kind of pivot a little bit and try to start working out some admin role development. But I think admin roles, they're going to take some time, and Sasha and all of you as well. Well, we've got about 12 minutes left. We do have a number of just kind of other questions. I feel like most of them, honestly, when I'm kind of reviewing them, kind of have been answered. And I don't think any of the remaining questions we have are crucial to our next steps. So you guys help build a lot of those questions. What's the next?
I'll take a motion to remove me as chair now. Is that? No?
We do want to identify our next meeting date if possible, though.
Yes.
Get that on the calendar. I think, all right, all the consideration from the DOR side is like maybe just give us a little time to kind of massage some of these changes. But I would say, starting with a month out and kind of going.
When the session.
Session ends the Friday of the first week of March.
Yeah, March 6th. Do you want to look out right after that?
Session. I think that's a good start. Yeah.
Like the 6th.
I think India will be on a vacation.
Actually, things do get a little easier.
That list grows.
Yeah.
After the session, the more we say it, the longer that list.
But our work is, we don't have to be up there urging anybody else. So maybe the 6th is a good day.
I'm
February.
March.
It would be a Friday.
I think I'm fine that day.
Maybe we should have some celebrate.
I'm good on 6th.
I don't know
Yeah.
if they're gonna be able to do that.
That's a good point.
What's that?
That can be a hard day.
Yeah, the week following is probably.
Yeah, 13th.
And I think, just to acknowledge, we have a 5-member board, but we also have a lot of really important community members who have worked very hard on this. It's really invaluable. So definitely want to make sure that they have the availability.
I have
If the board said, agrees.
13th is for some board meeting that morning at 9.
Is that up here?
That was actually virtual. So I mean, I could join virtually, it would just have to be at a different time at 11 or.
I'm also good like the day before. I mean, that whole week for me is open right now.
How long does the meeting need to be, Patrick?
Good question.
I mean, that's
Depends.
maybe another 2 hours.
At least.
So maybe we should serve lunch then if we're gonna
Yeah.
do it that time, yeah.
This lunch meeting.
The 11th, 12th, or 13th would be the best days for me, if that helps.
Me too. Either of those days I'm fine with. 13th's out for you, right?
Just from 9 to 11, but, yeah, if we did it after that, fine.
I can reach out to Brandy and Selena and see what
Yeah, do you
days
wanna
out of
just-
those three.
Yeah, and then just send an invite and we'll see what we get.
Okay. Just another 2 hours. Okay, well, we'll plan for another 2 hours.
Okay.
Any other kind of general thoughts on kind of where we're at? How we've kind of broken up the application, kind of our expectations for what we're gonna get pre-filled.
Hope it makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we on the right path here?
Yeah, I think that's the safest way is what you expense on that you're requesting back instead of pre.
Yeah, and as long as like the data is readily available for you guys, I think pre-filling out as much as possible is the best option.
And that's a priority, is to make this as easy as possible for our applicants.
And for us, like we're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, even that first section, and we'll figure that out, the technical issues of like, how do we manage this? Cause I've never done a pre-filled application like this before, but I don't think it's gonna be an issue.
Do you guys have to put rule out to public comment for this as well?
Yeah, we will need to put rule out, we'll have 30 days on that. I think that will probably be a lot of what we're working on over the next, months, and I guess 6 weeks. And then when we meet next time, we'll probably do a lot of admirable discussion, and we'll send those out for draft before, so you can at least take a look at them.
And if you have input,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, what about, I know we need to close out here. What about that suggestion? I think Paiute, Wayne County, those are kind of what I'm thinking of. Those are the ones that don't have a lot of opportunity to, and there's probably others that I'm just not thinking of, but don't have a lot of opportunity to raise TRT funds because of the limitations in the counties of not only public land, but just tax base and location size, et cetera. They don't have a lot of rentals. They don't have those sort of things. Whereas us, we have a ton of hotels. Sheriff Curtis is on a major highway, so there's a little bit more hotels in his area. But there are areas that, we all visit. I ride my UTV there all the time. I go fishing there all the time, but in Paiute County, but they just don't have the same opportunity. Is there a way for us to potentially capture some of that information in these grants, just to show their need? I know if you look at the dollars, like I know, of course, we want to supplant as much as we can of those Core County costs, or the intention is to help ease the burden on Core County costs. But, my area is well situated to mitigate. Of course, the need is much larger than the actual money we have. I'm not trying to say our county doesn't need funding. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we have more ability to raise those funds.
Yeah.
Are you wanting to do a percentage for 6 class counties, 5th class counties,
Yeah,
3rd class?
I'm just wondering if there's and maybe it's already covered with the justification there, but is there some formula that could be agreed upon where, that if a county has, I don't know, a certain size of TRT funding pot, that maybe it's a sliding scale. The more TRT funding they have, their percentage or their available percentage from grant funds goes down a little. That way, it kind of takes into account the fact, like I said, Paiute, and I remember working with Commissioner Bushman, in Paiute, they have very little opportunity to raise funds to mitigate tourism impacts.
one thing that we had done a bit ago, but I worked with Kimsey Gardner and we created an algorithm, and I made it super simple where we took into account the average income per person in the county,
Interesting.
which as well as the size of the county, and figured that out. So it wasn't like we were comparing Morgan County to San Juan County. San Juan County, by size would seem like they
Huge,
got it,
right.
but they're the lowest, the lowest
Yeah.
income per
Yeah.
person. So it could be something similar to that. And we could chat
Oh.
with Kempsey Gardner.
The bill does establish that, like, definitely emergency over safety, but then kind of once we get beyond that, it's counties with smaller population over counties with larger populations. And that's even above amount of recreation or tourism taking place within the county. So
Yeah.
those kind of are baked in, and we can think of some weighted.
That's really good because her example, like San Juan County is larger than Grand County in population. Right, so it has more people. But it has less ability, right, it has less TRT funding, and so I think that needs to be factored for sure.
CRT per population.
Yeah, some
Divided
sort
by
of
population.
factor, yeah,
But even that, I mean, that doesn't always determine the need
of course.
for what we're talking
Of
about
course.
here. Because
No, but
even
when you
Paiute-
enter the TRT,
Yeah.
now all of a sudden you've got a third factor. But when you're talking about Paiute Wayne,
Right.
and they really have a huge disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a little bit of money there is gonna go a long ways, right?
Yes.
Because they don't have the call outs that you guys have.
Go ahead, Sheriff.
I just think we're gonna need to take this issue on a little bit of a case by case too, just because of all the things that you're saying, plus, it's not always apples to apples. So while, Paiute County may have a lot of ATV tourism, for example, they don't necessarily have people base jumping off of cliffs, which is kind of an expensive rescue thing or whatever. So we're just gonna have to kind of look at those. And see, another example might be that a search and rescue team in Paiute County might need a snow cap, but there's no way they could ever afford that. And that's a $400,000 expense. And so anyway, we're gonna have to kind of look at those case by case, because that's probably how we're gonna be the most help.
Okay.
Thanks, Sheriff, that's, accurate, for sure. Okay.
I think public comment. Yes, I guess public meeting. I'll let the chair call for public comment if we have any numbers on it.
Anybody, last comments before we close out?
I think you have to say public comment for anybody who's.
Oh, okay, is there any comments from members of the public? Okay, I close the meeting, right? I don't need a motion to close the meeting if it's done with the agenda, I think. So let's close the meeting.
And Paul, we are adjourned. Paul, there you go.
Thank you. You are off the record.